Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Geek Boulevard Weekly. I am your host, Steve. I love movies and I love video games. A lot of news has dropped in the past week, so let's get right down to the nitty-gritty, shall we? If you like this video, please hit that like button. It helps out a ton, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, tick the bell, and get notified whenever I drop new videos. The Game Awards is not far off. It's going to be happening on December 7th, and we have our list of Game of the Year nominees, and each one is just packing a major punch in terms of their gameplay, story, presentation, and just everything in between. The first one on the list is Alan Wake 2 with 8 nominations, the long-awaited sequel to the cult hit original. It blew everyone away with its dark and captivating story and went into full survivor horror mode and just further fleshed out the Control universe that Remedy has established in a very satisfying way, so not surprised to see it on here. Next up is Baldur's Gate 3 with 8 nominations, an epic 100+ hour RPG experience in the D&D universe that has just been dominating the gaming space since it's been released, actually, and shows no signs of stopping whatsoever. And just a heads up for my physical game collectors, Larian Studios announced recently that Baldur's Gate 3 will see a physical release on all platforms in Q1 2024, and it's going to be priced at around $80. And when the game released, it was released only digitally. There were no talks at the time that they were going to release a physical copy, but that's changing, thank goodness. The game will ship on 2 discs for PS5, 1 disc for PC, and a whopping 3 discs for Xbox. I'm assuming that this will be a limited run of these because making this many discs, I'm sure, was very pricey, so make sure to act fast when they start dropping those pre-orders. Marvel Spider-Man 2 makes its way onto the list, which is not surprising. It's probably the more mainstream of all the nominees on here. With 7 nominations, the PS5 exclusive had gotten just rave reviews from many major gaming outlets and just elevated the feeling of what it means to be Spider-Man, to be greater. It's been garnered by many fans, myself included, as the most definitive Spider-Man game ever. So I'm happy to see it on there. Up next is the Resident Evil 4 remake with 4 nominations. RE4 I was very skeptical about when Capcom announced that they were remaking it because I felt the game was perfect as it was. I mean, yeah, the gameplay probably could have been updated, maybe had a little bit of a flashier coat of paint, but it wasn't necessary. But it felt like Capcom was going to go in that direction anyway and start remaking a lot of their old Resident Evil titles. M2 was the original studio that was working on it, and then it was eventually rebooted in-house by Capcom. There was a lot of production issues going on behind the scenes with M2 and Capcom. They were taking the story in a direction that Capcom wasn't necessarily happy with, so they just decided to scrap production and start completely fresh with one of their own internal studios. Then the game finally released, and all those worries that I had and many others had just faded away instantly. The game is so atmospheric, it's tense, the original DNA is still there, just expanded upon and given a fresh coat of paint. The Separate Ways DLC got praise as well, so props to Capcom for just knocking it out of the park. It was definitely tough to pull it off, but they did it. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is next on the list with 5 nominations. Mario games, they're always going to win awards no matter what, so it just makes sense to put this in here. Reviews are glowing. It's been hailed as the most accessible and best 2D Mario game ever. Nothing else needs to be said there. It's just that simple. Last but certainly not least, we have The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Out of all of these nominees, the ones that I think are going to be a surefire tie here are Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3. Tears of the Kingdom just elevated the formula that was made in Breath of the Wild in just so many ways. Sure, the world is massive, but you just have so much more unique puzzles, more boss fights, just more of what you love, and then some. But Baldur's Gate 3 is a beast in its own right. If I had to choose though, I would put my money on Baldur's Gate 3 taking it, because it just seems to me that more people are talking about Baldur's Gate 3 these days, more so than Zelda. So I think it's going to be a very tight win, but I think Baldur's Gate 3 is going to take it for sure. Simply put, 2023 was just a fantastic year for gaming. We ate good, for sure. Switching gears now, as we have confirmation from Deadline that Destin Daniel Cretton, the director of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, who was hired to direct Avengers: The Kang Dynasty, has stepped away from the massive project. It's being reported that he's not exactly leaving Marvel Studios, though. In fact, Cretton is still still talking with Marvel about directing future movies. One of them confirmed to be Shang-Chi 2. I mean, we've been waiting on a sequel for that for a little while now, and we haven't seen Shang-Chi in pretty much anything else outside of his own standalone movie, so I think he's definitely overdue to show up somewhere soon, so I think that's definitely necessary. He's also helming a Wonder Man series that will be airing on Disney+. Deadline stated, quote, Cretton is currently busy on the Marvel Studios Disney Plus series Wonder Man, which he co-created with Andrew Guest, who serves as showrunner. Cretton executive produces the series and also directed the first 2 episodes. The series resumes shooting after Thanksgiving. Wonder Man will be under the new Marvel Spotlight series banner, which are shows that are standalone series and not part of the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, this was news that I didn't know about. I didn't know they were going to be putting this under the Marvel Spotlight banner, so that was interesting to find that information out. This story came at a pretty suspicious time, though, as it was being reported that due to the underperformance of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and where Kang the Conqueror pretty much made his full debut, Marvel let go of then writer of said film, and also at one point was the writer for Kang Dynasty, Jeff Loveness, due to the character of Kang not exactly landing with audiences. I'm sure Jonathan Majors' legal issues didn't help matters either, but apparently the Kang character in general is what seems to have forced Marvel to kind of pivot to a different direction. Hell, we could see a complete title change on the next Avengers film, which Marvel has done before when Infinity War and Endgame were known as Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. Personally, I would like to see them continue with Kang in some capacity, not necessarily as the big bad. I know that there were talks that they were pivoting to Doctor Doom, and if that is the case, I mean, obviously Doctor Doom is the more recognizable villain of the two, so if Marvel Studios does pivot to him, I can see Kang maybe being an underling of Doom or working together with him in some way. That way he can still be involved in the storyline. But regardless of what happens with Jonathan Majors, they're most likely going to have to recast, which doesn't really seem like that much of a problem because there's many different variants of Kang. He can look like many different people, so that doesn't really seem crazy enough to really think about. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is officially real. Naughty Dog and PlayStation have confirmed the release of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which is set to release January 19th of 2024 and comes with a lot of new content. First of them being a brand new mode called No Return, which is a roguelike survival mode. The mode also is going to include some playable characters, and some of those characters will be playable for the very first time. There will also be a new guitar-free play mode. Part 2 had these small sections where you would use the touchpad on the DualShock 4 to strum the guitar keys on the guitar, which I really enjoyed, and people got really creative in those moments because they were very intimate and very personal, and they were playing a lot of their favorite songs by just using their touchpad, which is really cool. So it's nice to see that they included an entire mode dedicated to that. This next part really intrigued me. They're calling them Lost Levels. These cut levels were very early in development and will come with developer commentary as to what they intended for these levels before they were cut from the official game. There's also a new director's commentary for the story cutscenes as well, featuring Neil Druckmann, narrative lead Haley Gross, and stars Troy Baker, Ashley Johnson, and Laura Bailey. On the technical side, the remastered version will include native 4K in fidelity mode, upscaled 4K in performance, and unlocked frame rate for TVs that support VRR, among a bunch of other things like improved shadows as well, and full DualSense support, which is nice. For those that have the PS4 version of the game, you can upgrade to the remastered version for just $10, which is honestly the best news out of all of this. But I'm very conflicted on this announcement. Part 1, when it released, was $70 with no factions mode. So it came with, the base game, the single player DLC, but no factions mode. So the game wasn't really a complete package. It should have been $50. Meanwhile, Part 2 Remastered, which isn't really a remaster, let's just be honest here, is upgradable for $10. I think Naughty Dog and Sony saw the backlash that Part 1 received and went a more reasonable direction here. Also, this should have been called a director's cut, not a remaster, because it's not really being remastered. There's really not much to remaster. It's pretty much the same game, just with more modes and maybe some crisper frames, and some things pop out maybe a little bit more, but there's really not much going on there. I like the announcement, but I also hate it. at the same time. I just think it's time to see what new IP Naughty Dog has been working on, because this constant dipping into this pool, into this franchise, is just killing me at this point. It just needs to stop. Come on now. Moving on to Marvel Studios, as they may have found their Mr. Fantastic. One of the top names that was considered for a while was Adam Driver, but it appears that none other than Pedro Pascal is in closing talks to sign on to play the leader of Marvel's first family in the MCU. According to Deadline, quote, insiders add that scheduling is still being worked out, but multiple sources close to the negotiations are saying it's headed in the right direction for Pascal to do this and his other future projects. Pascal has a full dance card that includes Gladiator 2, which is expected to go into production before the end of the year, as well as his popular HBO series The Last of Us, which is expected to shoot next year, as well as Zach Cregger's Weapons. Now, Pedro Pascal is one of those actors who will take a role and just do the absolute best that he can. He knocked it out of the park as the Mandalorian and was the perfect casting, at least to me, as Joel in The Last of Us. And who could forget his breakout performance in Game of Thrones as Oberyn Martell? This casting news tells me that Marvel Studios is taking this project very seriously, because out of all of their other films and characters, this and the X-Men are ones they absolutely cannot screw up on. If they do, it could put Marvel Studios into a really tough situation and could lose all the faith that the fans have had for this studio, whatever little faith there is left. I'm more than ready to see the MCU Fantastic Four, and this gives me just a little bit of hope that they're handling the project with the utmost care. Warner Brothers denies that their upcoming Wonder Woman game is a live service title. We know pretty much next to nothing about the upcoming Wonder Woman title from Monolith Productions, the makers of Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. But with the recent news that Warner was looking to double down on live service titles for a lot of their major franchises, the new Suicide Squad game being a prime example, I was horrified that Wonder Woman would fall victim to this fate, as there was a job listing recently asking for someone with live service experience in helping to maintain said products. Well, I can rest easy now, and you can too, as Warner Brothers has come out to confirm that Wonder Woman will not be a live service title after all. They stated, quote, Wonder Woman is a single-player action-adventure game set in a dynamic open world. This third-person experience will allow players to become Diana of Themyscira and introduce an original story set in the DC universe, while also featuring the Nemesis system. That's the combat system that was utilized in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, for those that don't know. Wonder Woman is not being designed as a live service title. That is a huge relief. The recent video that Rocksteady had put out, for example, going into detail on the story of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and the various elements within, was a way to try to win over the fans that decided to check out of the title due to all of the live service elements clearly forced into the title. It got a lot of negative feedback, and it definitely won some people over for sure with this new video that they released, but marketing is sneaky that way, so most were not fooled. And then this news coming out that Wonder Woman will stay a single player experience, it just seems like suspicious timing. Perhaps Warner Brothers sees that fans don't really want this stuff after all, but only time will tell. Moving on to some casting news for Superman Legacy, director and co-CEO of DC Studios, James Gunn, has found his villainous Lex Luthor in none other than Nicholas Hoult. It seems they're going the route of Superman Returns in that they cast a relative unknown in David Corenswet, who echoes Brandon Routh in that regard, and have a big name for the villain with Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. According to Deadline, the studio wanted to go through the casting process after the SAG-AFTRA strike of landing an actor to play Luthor. Warner's is already in business with Hoult on Clint Eastwood's Juror No. 2. Hoult also starred in the 2015 Warner Brothers blockbuster Mad Max Fury Road, which made over $380 million at the global box office. This comes off the heels of the announcement that Venezuelan actress Maria Gabriela de Faria landed the role of villain the Engineer. And this is going to be quite a stacked movie, guys. There's a lot of cameo appearances from Hawkgirl, Green Lantern is being played by Nathan Fillion, so there's going to be a lot of characters in this movie. I'm excited for it, but I'm kind of worried because it seems like a very jam-packed production, so hopefully James Gunn can do this film justice. And for those that don't know, Hoult was originally cast as the villain for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, but then dropped out due to some scheduling conflicts. And he's no stranger to superhero franchises, of course, having played Beast in X-Men First Class up to X-Men Dark Phoenix. And I personally love this casting. I think Holt has quickly become a quite versatile actor, and I personally would love to see him play more villainous roles to really challenge his acting chops just a bit more. That wraps up this week's edition of GB Weekly. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm currently working on my review for The Marvels, and I have some things I have to say about it, so don't miss out. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, folks, keep it classy and keep it geeky.